What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Friday, January 24th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. Sorry for the late start. I actually had everything ready at 4:45 for the first time in a long time, and then realized that I hadn't loaded in today's ownership, and so everything that I did was completely useless and had to do it again. So sorry for the late start, but here now. It is only a 3-game slate, so should be able to get through this pretty quickly. Have plenty of time to work on lineups after the show before lock. Portland taking on Charlotte, Cleveland taking on Philadelphia, and the Pels facing Memphis. Two of these games have 10-plus point spreads. The other game is the Blazers and Hornets, so either of these teams could easily lose by 100 points too, but it does only have about a 5-point spread. So pretty interesting slate. I do think that there are some interesting rotational things to talk about. We do still have a couple of pretty important Q tags as well that we'll get into. Two of these games start at 7 p.m. One starts at 8. So hopefully we get news on the 8 o'clock game, which specifically would mean Ja Morant, but we'll see. So I will touch on all of that. But as always, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. That stuff helps out quite a bit. And also subscribing to the channel helps you, since I don't do this show every single day. I am trying to be more consistent about it. Sometimes I fail. So it helps you just get notifications when I am doing the show. That should help you out. So starting here with Portland taking on Charlotte. Again, with this being a 3-game slate, it kind of means two things for the show / for how you're playing. Like, you're going to just get to players that you would normally not consider at all. It's not that they suddenly look really good. It's just that you have limited options. And as far as the show goes, it does end up meaning that I need to talk about a bunch of guys that are really not fun to talk about, because you do have to get a little bit deeper into rotations, into the bench. So it can create some interesting things you can find maybe. Finished 5th in the $4 yesterday. Awesome. Jalen Williams, absolute lock after killing me the day before. I had a good amount of him too, but didn't end up with anything good. I didn't have Jokic, and that obviously killed me. Starting here with Portland and Charlotte, we have a Q tag on Chris Murray. Nothing else for Portland that is up in the air. Tamani Kamara is probable. Donovan Clingan is probable. Anthony Simons is probable. Still no Matisse Thybulle, no DeAndre Ayton, and no Robert Williams. So we have Clingan, who missed 5 games with an ankle sprain. My assumption here is that he starts, and we basically get a rotation that is just like the rotation we got yesterday with Robert Williams and Jabari Walker. Robert Williams played 23 and a half in that one. I projected him for 22 minutes. I have a 22-minute projection on Clingan as well. And I guess it would help if I loaded that in here too. But I'm expecting it to basically be those two splitting most of the center minutes. And then I have like 6 minutes, give or take, going to Jeremy Grant at center. I think you'll see some of that too. You know, you obviously have wings on the Blazers that can soak up some minutes, and you move Grant to the 5. So I do think you'll see some of that, but I haven't projected basically the same way as yesterday. So I have 22 minutes. Here it is, 22 minutes going to Clingan. He's getting 40% ownership, and I'm a little surprised that I'm not getting around the field. You know, it is a good spot against Charlotte. There is some chance that he just plays more than 22 minutes, in which case, if you're not getting to him, obviously you're in trouble. But the flip side is, you know, it is a 3-game slate. We are talking about large field tournaments, and you do have opportunity cost still at center. You have Mark Williams on the other side of this game. You have Jarrett Allen still playing without Evan Mobley. You know, you have Misi for the Pels. You know, he's back today. So there are still other solid center options. Clearly not as many as you would normally have, but I'm a little surprised I'm not getting more than I am right now, about half the field on him though. I do feel pretty comfortable with the 22-minute projection, just given that he has missed 5 games. I think that kind of lands pretty nicely in the range of, I don't know, unless, you know, we hear specific numbers, I don't know exactly how limited he's going to be, but going to 22, you know, just kind of gives you a nice middle ground between, like, I could, I guess, see him playing 24, 25. You could see him play 18, 19. So I think landing in there makes sense. Dre said, do you like stacking starting centers from one game in your lineups? I don't really care one way or the other. There's pros and cons. You know, obviously there's, you know, only one guy can get a rebound on any missed shot, but like if the game is competitive and goes down to the wire, you get positive correlation there. It's not something that I really have a strong lean on either way. I am getting to around 2x the field here on Jeremy Grant, and I do like this. This was something that stood out to me when I looked at industry projections this morning. Maybe they change between now and lock, but I think the industry in general, which ends up leading to the field, is just a little bit low on Jeremy Grant's minutes here. Now, it is a back-to-back, so there is some chance that Portland runs a deeper rotation than they have been. But yesterday, they basically ran like a 7.5 borderline 8-man rotation. And that is something that we've seen the Blazers do frequently this year when they are missing a starter. It's more extreme when they're missing like Anthony Simons or Jeremy Grant. You really see the playing time ramp up for the main guys. But if you look at their rotations yesterday, Scoot Henderson fouled out in like 14 minutes. So his overall playing time is misleading. But if you look at like the first half rotation where you don't have garbage time and you didn't have Scoot Henderson in too much foul trouble yet, Delano Banton played 3 minutes and 49 seconds in the first half. Chris Murray played 3 minutes and 35 seconds in the first half. Other than that, the only people that played minutes were the 5 starters: Simons, Avdia, Kamara, Grant, and Williams, Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe, and Jabari Walker. So, basically an 8-man rotation with, a little bit of Murray, a little bit of Banton. They could run it a little bit deeper here. It's not like I projected 36 minutes to Grant or anything, but in the games he's played this year without Ayton, he's average his median playing time is like 37 minutes. He's clearly not on a restriction anymore. We've seen him play around 34 minutes in back-to-back games. He played 33.8 yesterday, lost about 2 minutes to garbage time. So you don't have him on that like 30-minute restriction he had been on when he first came back from injury. I have him in for between 33 and 34 minutes here. We have a relatively close spread in this game. If it does truly go down to the wire, I think there's a good chance that you're getting, 36, 37 minutes. So I'm a little bit higher on him from a playing time standpoint than other places I've seen. And not surprisingly, at 5,400, I am getting to him a good amount here. You have a nice matchup against Charlotte too. Pretty much even with the field on Anthony Simons at 6,400. Jabari Walker, I do like this. It's not that I love Jabari Walker individually. Like, it's not that I think he's a great play or anything like that. But what I do expect is that, like I said, you're getting around 42 minutes or so combined from Clingan and Walker. If Clingan were to get in foul trouble or Clingan were to just be more significantly limited than projected, basically, if for any reason Clingan ends up playing like 18 minutes instead of 22 or 23, you're most likely adding extra minutes onto Jabari Walker, who I have projected for about 19 minutes here. Now, the reason that I don't think Jabari Walker is a great play is he is center only. So you do still take on that opportunity cost. But if he's only going to be projected for 4% ownership, you're getting negative correlation with a 40% owned Clingan. You're getting a value piece that does have volatility in his playing time, which can lead to, better fantasy production. You're obviously not expecting him to have 5 or 6 steals or whatever he did yesterday, but he does. All indications that he is the backup center here. He's been ahead of Duop Reith in these situations. Chris Murray also questionable, and if he's out, it solidifies those minutes even more. So just as a pivot on a short slate, I do think as long as the ownership stays really low on Jabari Walker, he does make some sense. You could play them together too. That obviously wouldn't be my preference. I would prefer, and I don't have any lineups with them together here, I would prefer to just have Clingan or have Walker. But there is some world where like Clingan plays 23, 24 minutes and he's really good. And then Walker plays 18, 19 minutes and he's, one of the best sub $3,500 plays. So I wouldn't set a rule against it, but it's not my preference. I'd rather just have one of them. Denny Avdia, 7K, obviously expensive. Don't get too down on his playing time yesterday, though. Obviously, another game like yesterday is in his range of outcomes where he only played about 26 minutes. But we've seen plenty of games when he starts and plays mid-30s as well. So I think it would be a mistake to completely overreact to yesterday. I have him in for 30.5 minutes. Gets me around half the field here. But I do want to mention that, yesterday is obviously it's a data point. It happened. It can happen again. But you don't want to get too caught up in just assuming that they're going to replicate that exact rotation today. Tumani Kamara getting 10% ownership at 5,200. Nothing really to say about him either. Playing time, should play low 30s. He played a little bit more yesterday than you're typically going to see. Played 34.2 minutes, but again, that could happen again. But the playing time is kind of volatile there when you think about closing lineups for Portland, basically you assume Anthony Simons is going to close. You assume that Jeremy Grant is going to close. And then you're going to get maybe one of Klingon or Walker, but that's not even guaranteed because they could close with Grant at the 5. Scoot Henderson, if he's playing well, could close. Avdia could close. Kamara could close. Sharp could close. So you have a lot of volatility in the closing lineup. And what that basically leads to is just more, obviously, like a wider range of outcomes, because not only are you talking about the typical wide range of outcomes that every player has when it comes to performance, but you also have, Denny Avdia could play 26 minutes. He could play 34 minutes. And you don't always get that from starters. A lot of times starters have more limited ranges. But Avdia has a wide range here. Kamara has a wide range. And then off the bench, you have Henderson that could really play anywhere from like 22 to 30. You have Sharp that could really play like 22 to 30. So those guys have very wide ranges. I'm not getting to Henderson at 1% owned. His salary is up to $6,800. I'm not getting to Sharp at 5% owned. He's up to $5,900. I would probably go to Sharp before I went to Henderson because I do, on average, just expect Sharp to play more minutes, and he is a little bit cheaper, but I'm not getting to either one of them right now. Steven said, haven't they played Avdia at the 5 a little? Can't do it against Williams, but if he is off the court, maybe small ball. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm talking about with Grant. Like, if you want to call that Avdia, you can. But also you can do it with Williams on the floor. Like, not saying they will, but teams go small against traditional centers too. All you're doing is you're giving up rebounding, but you're putting, in this case, Mark Williams in uncomfortable situations by making him close out on the 3-point line if you're spreading the floor with 5 shooters. So it's not always just saying, oh, they have a big, that means that you can't go small. Like, they still can. But yeah, I mean, I have 6 minutes going to Grant. It could certainly be Avdia, like however you want to phrase that. I have 6 minutes going small to Portland. On the other side for Charlotte, LaMelo Ball is questionable. Brandon Miller is out for the season. We've had Nick Smith Jr. in the starting lineup in his place. Miles Bridges is also questionable. So huge news that we're waiting on in this one. Obviously, if one or both of those guys are out, it changes everything because, for one, it opens up a lot of minutes. And then for two, it opens up a lot of usage because nobody else on this team really is a high usage guy whatsoever. If you were to take both of those guys out, then you're getting one of these really ugly situations where you're going to end up with increased projections on a lot of guys on Charlotte because they're going to play more and have more opportunities. But the efficiency is really going to be up in the air because none of these guys are, shot creators or guys that are good enough in the NBA on ball to get it themselves. So things can get really ugly if they get ruled out. But for now, assuming that they're in, you are getting a lot of ownership coming into this team. Mark Williams at 40%, $7,800 price tag. On the one hand, you look at that and, there's kind of some sticker shock because it's Mark Williams and he's been, $5K or $5,500 or whatever for most of the season. But it's not chasing points to go to him. And the reason is that it's an entirely different situation now than it has been for most of the season. Nick Richards no longer on the team. We had been in a situation for a lot of the year where Williams, Richards, and to some extent Diabate were splitting 48 minutes at center. Then you saw Williams' minutes start to ramp up a little bit, but not to the extent that they are now that Nick Richards is out of the picture. Now you have Mark Williams as a true starting center. You have Diabate as his backup. Projecting around 32 minutes to Williams, 16 minutes to Diabate makes a ton of sense. And Mark Williams so far this season, 1.43 DraftKings points per minute. Now you also get this Portland front court where you presumably have a limited Klingon, and then you're just getting backups, I assume Jabari Walker behind him. Looks like a very, very good spot to get to Mark Williams. He'd be in about half my lineups if the slate started right now. LaMelo, if you can get to him at 10.5, obviously goes without saying. That's a good play. I have him as, I believe, the highest projected player. Yeah, I have him as the highest projected player on the slate by actually a few points, pretty decent margin there. But he is obviously expensive. Miles Bridges, I'm getting to 23% of the time. I am a little bit lower on his playing time than the field. So I'm not surprised that at 51% ownership, I'm a little bit lower. At 32 minutes, I don't think that I'm crazy low. I've just seen him projected other places for 34 minutes, which he certainly can get to. Like, it's firmly in his range of outcomes. We've seen it in recent games, but I didn't want to go that high as a median projection because I think that like he's just landing on 32 a lot. If you go back and look at recent games, 34, 32, 32, 39, 32. He is averaging 34 over his last 5. So, maybe I'm a little low. He's at 31.5 for the season. But I landed at 32 minutes here, and it still gets him in my lineups, but not as much as the field. If you are a little bit more bullish on his minutes, I think that's fine. But basically the way I see it, he's a good play, but he's one of the easier guys, I think, to just find alternatives to. Not that they necessarily project quite as well or look quite as good, but he's in this price range at 7,400 where there are just going to be other guys that you can get to. For me, at least right now, when you talk about Williams or Bridges, obviously different positions, but similar prices, I have a higher projection on Williams. He's a bigger priority for me. So that's probably what's costing me Bridges a little bit, but individually still certainly a good play. I understand why people are playing him. No Brandon Miller opens up more usage as well. Nick Smith getting 15% ownership. His salary did jump a little bit to 4,200. I have him in 17% of my lineups. One nice thing about Nick Smith is that he is basically blowout proof. Not that I'm saying I think this game is super likely to blow out. It's not. It has a 5-point spread, but it is nice because if you actually dig into just like NBA games in general, you'll pretty quickly realize that regardless of the spread, games blow out like way more often than you would think. So somebody like Nick Smith, it is nice that like he's probably just going to play straight through garbage time if the game blows out. He's pretty likely to be in the closing lineup if it's competitive. So I have him in for 28.5 minutes at 4,200. Still does obviously have to contend with LaMelo and Miles Bridges, assuming they're in for usage. So far this season has a 20% usage rate overall, 0.9 or 0.82 DraftKings points per minute. He is somebody that I would expect to get more opportunities, at least if Ball and or Bridges are out. So far this year, 103 minutes with LaMelo on the floor, 20.8% usage rate, 0.89 DraftKings points per minute. So it is nice that you haven't seen any sort of drop off for Nick Smith when he's played with LaMelo. He's played 63 minutes with both LaMelo and Bridges, 1.02 DraftKings points per minute, 63 minutes played. So probably some shooting luck in there. I would expect the point per minute production to come down a bit, but point being that he's not taking huge hits playing with these guys. And I expect him to play around 28 minutes or so on average. So looks like a pretty solid value. And then you just kind of get into some fringe plays from Charlotte. Cody Martin, 3,900 off the bench, playing around 23 minutes or so on average, but there are, ways the game can break where he looks better. If LaMelo or Bridges are out, I would expect Cody Martin to be one of the guys that immediately starts to look better. Would think there's a good chance he moves into the starting lineup. If Bridges is out, although it's Charlotte, they can do kind of whatever they want. But Cody Martin is one of these guys that can just kind of do everything on the floor. He's not great at anything, but he can play multiple positions. He can handle the ball a bit. So he is somebody where when you start removing guys from the lineup, he just kind of immediately fits in different ways. At 3,900, if he's playing well, he can find his way into closing lineups potentially. So there is some volatility, some upside there. Josh Okogie, 3,200, purely a 3-game slate play. Diabate, 3,100, basically your Jabari Walker play. He is $200 less. He is a good point per minute, guys. So a little bit surprised, I guess, that maybe I'm not like splitting my Jabari Walker and Diabate, but it is what it is. Diabate, I think, is very, very similar to Walker. I do have Walker projected for a few minutes more than Diabate, so that probably is what it is. But if Williams were to get in foul trouble, I would expect Diabate to just be stepping into more minutes. Maybe eventually, if it's really bad foul trouble, they get into like Taj Gibson or something. But for the most part, I expect 48 minutes to be split between Williams and Diabate, which means that if something happens to Williams, it is directly good for Diabate. Moving on to Cleveland and Philadelphia. This one is an interesting one to talk about. Caris LeVert is questionable. His status does matter a lot for a couple of different reasons. For one, the last game he was in, he got the start in place of Evan Mobley. He only played like 25 minutes. He didn't close. So I do want to reiterate that Caris LeVert starting when Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland are active is much, much, much different than Caris LeVert starting in place of one of those guys. One, because when both of those guys are on the floor, there is nothing for Caris LeVert to do that creates fantasy points. And two, it just lowers his minute projection. That was actually the only game in the last 2 seasons that he has started with both of those guys. And you saw it, that he just played, 25 minutes and didn't close, as opposed to when he starts in place of one of them, you're frequently getting 33, 34, 35 minutes from him. So that is a big change, but he's still $4,000. And if you project him for 26 minutes, he's going to look like a good value here, showing up 46% for me, 37% for the field. So if he's in, just going to be one of the more appealing values on the slate, even with a modest projection that is accounting for the fact that he is far from guaranteed to be in the closing lineup and that he isn't the same fantasy producer playing with Mitchell and Garland. He should still get plenty of his minutes with only one of them on the floor, but you won't get any minutes with just him. And that's a big difference, because if he's starting, if like Mitchell's out and LeVert is starting with Garland, what happens is they'll stagger Garland and LeVert. And so then LeVert's playing with the second unit and he's on ball and he's racking up fantasy points. Now they'll still stagger, but he's always going to be on the floor with one of Garland or Mitchell, and they're going to be the ones on ball more than him and cutting into his fantasy production. So that's why you see a really big drop. But it's really just still a pricing thing here if he's in. The other big impact that he has if he's in is if he's in, I think it opens the opportunity to relatively aggressively get to some of these secondary pieces on the Cavs. And the reason is, and this is an assumption, there's nothing guaranteeing that I'm right or that this happens, but the best information that we have, if you go back to the game that Karis LeVert started with no Evan Mobley, that was a game against Minnesota. Tristan Thompson DNP'd in that game. Now, in the games that Karis LeVert has been out, Tristan Thompson has been the straight backup center to Jarrett Allen. And that makes sense because you're taking 25, 26 minutes of Karis LeVert out of the wing rotation. You have to have those guys then play their minutes on the wing as opposed to being able to play small more. In the game against Minnesota, Jarrett Allen played like 36 minutes, but in a lot of the non-Jarrett Allen minutes, Rudy Gobert was out there, and the Cavs still went with Niang as the backup center. So if LeVert's in, I'm projecting it that way again, to where Thompson basically gets kicked out of the rotation outside of garbage time, and you're getting a rotation where Niang plays more. There's minutes available still for the wings, whereas I think the way the industry in general is projecting this is they're kind of like not projecting Thompson to be the full backup, but they're projecting him to they're kind of like middling it, where we don't know if he's going to be if he's in the rotation or not. So what ends up happening if you do that is you say, okay, like Tristan Thompson's going to play 8, 9, 10 minutes. It makes Tristan Thompson not look good, but it also takes those minutes away. You know, it takes a minute or two away from Jerome, from Niang, from Wade, from these wings that if Tristan Thompson doesn't play, are actually playing really useful minutes. So I'm projecting it that way if LeVert is in. If Thompson plays, you know, obviously that's not ideal for the way I'm projecting it, but I think that's the most likely case, and that's the way that I'm going with it. If LeVert's in, if LeVert's out, then I think Tristan Thompson pretty much plays most or all of the backup center minutes, in which case he could actually start to look useful as well at 3,100. You know, also, if you completely disagree with me and you just think he's the backup center no matter what, he still is playable in large field tournaments at 3,100. But LeVert does have a big impact on that because the way I have it projected right now, you know, I have 23.5 minutes coming into Niang, 3,800, 7.5% owned. He played 29 minutes in that game against Minnesota. Obviously, you're not expecting that again. That's a game where Sam Merrill only played 6 minutes. I have Merrill playing, you know, 2 full rotations now, getting to like 16 minutes. But Jerome played almost 22 minutes in that game. Niang played 29. Dean Wade played 27. Like, these guys played a lot of minutes. Strus played 20. I don't have it in front of me. Strus played a lot off the bench. So I think it was like 27.7 or something. So you had all these wing guys play a ton because you had the extra minutes open from Thompson not being in the rotation. 27.7 for Strus. So again, I cut back. Like, I didn't project all of those minutes because I just kind of assume Merrill plays in the second half this time, which he didn't last time. But it does open those minutes up. Whereas if you're projecting LeVert and the Thompson in the rotation, it becomes really difficult to find minutes for everybody. So I am getting to Ty Jerome a little bit above the field. I'm getting to Niang over the field. I'm right around the field still on Dean Wade. Max Strus, I'm a little bit below the field right now at 4,300, but wouldn't be upset if that changed. Sam Merrill, you know, if he lands in a lineup here or there at 3,300, fine. He is the one that I think, like, I projected him for less minutes than any of these other guys, just based on the rotations we've seen. But the Karis LeVert piece is very, very interesting. Beyond that, I'm also interested in the main pieces from Cleveland. I understand this game has a double-digit spread. Cleveland is on the road, which is nice. Makes it a little bit less likely that you get the true them just, you know, running over Philadelphia and nobody playing in the fourth quarter game. But Evan Mobley being out does increased playing time projections for Darius Garland, Jared Allen, and Donovan Mitchell. In games that Mitchell has played without Mobley, both this year and last year, his median is 34 minutes. Garland is at 33. Allen's at, I think, 33 also, off the top of my head. These guys all play more minutes without Mobley, and it's for two reasons. One, you're taking arguably the best player on the team, one of the best players on the team, out of the lineup. So you don't have the luxury of resting Garland / Mitchell for quite as long when they're not on the floor. But two, not having Mobley just makes it more likely the game is a little bit competitive for a little bit longer, and you see playing time come up. And I think that the industry does, account for that, but I do have higher minutes projections on all these guys than I've seen around the industry by like a minute or so, and that just drives them up for me a little bit. In addition to, also Mobley not being on the floor just increases offensive opportunities when you have Karis LeVert, if he's the one starting, not doing anything offensively when Mitchell and Garland are out there. If LeVert's out and you're getting like Max Strus, then you're just talking, about another shooter as opposed to anybody with a remotely high usage rate. So you get more opportunities for Garland and Mitchell. Jared Allen plays a lot typically when Mobley is out. Doesn't have his backup center now, so I have him in for 32 minutes. If this game really is competitive, you probably are getting 34 to 36. I am getting at least a little bit more than the field on all of Garland, Allen, and Mitchell here, which has been the trend for me since Mobley's been out. So I really like Cleveland a lot. And I think this is sort of this is kind of filling in for like that Miles Bridges spot too. Miles Bridges is, $100 less than Darius Garland and getting twice the ownership. And so I'm just basically 2x on Garland and half on Bridges, and I think that's perfectly fine. They, to me, absolutely have a similar range of outcomes. Jared Allen in that price range, obviously a different position, but I'm getting a lot of him. So I think that's where a lot of that Miles Bridges is going, where I'm below the field. On the other side for Philly, for the first time in I think like a month, we don't have any Q tags on the Sixers. They actually just ruled out the guys that aren't going to play early on in the day. So we have no Andre Drummond, no Joel Embiid, no Kyle Lowry, no Caleb Martin, no KJ Martin, no Jared McCain. Pete Nance is available. My guess at the starting lineup is Tyrese Maxey, Eric Gordon, Kelly Oubre, Paul George, and Yabusele. I assume that Bona is backing up Yabusele, and then Pete Nance is playing garbage time. I assume you're getting limited minutes from either Doughton or Jackson as the backup to Maxey. Last game, Jackson was back in the rotation as his backup, and then Doughton played garbage time. And then on the wings, the big difference between this game and last game is that Drummond is out. So last game, you had Justin Edwards as like the first guy off the bench, firmly in the rotation. Ricky Council ended up getting like 12 minutes, but it was all garbage time. Now I assume Ricky Council is in the rotation, but I assume also that he's still behind Justin Edwards because that's just what we've seen lately. So that's how I projected that. Getting to a lot of Paul George here. 8K, shooting guard, small forward. Fields at 40%. It's just a cheap price tag for him with no Embiid. I've mentioned it before, but it's been night and day, the difference in Paul George's production with and without Joel Embiid on the floor this season. Last I checked, I think he was like a fantasy point per minute with Embiid on and like 1.2 with him off. 0.9 with Joel Embiid on the floor. 0.9 DraftKings points per minute for Paul George when he has shared the floor with Embiid. 1.2 with him off. So far this season, it's been 0.3 of a fantasy point per minute extra production when Embiid's off the floor. Obviously, you have blowout risk here, but there's blowout risk in the Memphis. There's blowout risk in all the games, but it's a similar spread to the Memphis game also. I like getting to George here. Then you also add on that it makes sense for me with the exposures I have right now to be getting to a lot of George also because of how much Cleveland I have. Like the easiest way to guarantee that the Cleveland guys play maximum minutes is for Paul George to just go out there and keep Philadelphia in the game single-handedly. So that makes sense also. And then he is $600 more than Bridges, getting less ownership. So this is somebody else where I'm just, a little bit over the field, and it's probably partly coming from Miles Bridges, which I'm fine with. Right around the field on Yabusele, power forward eligible at 5K. I expect him to play low 30s in minutes here. That's generally what we've seen in these situations. If everything goes perfectly, he can play 34 to 36, but on average, I expect like 30 to 31 from him. Just makes him look like a pretty good value. I like being 2x the field on Maxey here. Just very high upside guy, likely to play a lot of minutes. I have him at a 37.5 minute projection, which is generally pretty crazy for somebody that's in a double-digit spread. But the thing you have to keep in mind with Maxey is that if this game actually goes down to the wire, he's probably playing 40 plus. So I don't think it's as crazy as it would be with most other guys. So I do like getting to him here. Just it's a 3-game slate. You're getting Tyrese Maxey without Embiid at 10% ownership. Kelly Oubre is getting a bunch of ownership at 6K. I'm not getting there. I don't have specific reasons for it. I think it's probably just the Cleveland guys getting to more George, getting to more Maxey is just kind of squeezing Oubre out a little bit. I expect him to play mid-30s and low to mid-30s in minutes here. Obviously not the highest usage guy because he is playing with Maxey and George, but certainly a secondary scorer. Can do a lot of things on the floor. Perfectly fine if you land on him. I'm just not for whatever reason. Justin Edwards, 7% owned, 3,800. I have been playing a bunch of minutes, just not a good point per minute guy. If he falls into some lineups, fine. I do think that if I were less interested in the Cleveland pieces, I would probably be getting more Edwards, but it's that those Cleveland pieces look good to me because of how I projected that team. And so it is knocking some of the, 2/3 of a fantasy point per minute Justin Edwards out. Spizwolf said, is there a max number of Cleveland guys you're playing, like the non-Mitchell, Garland, Allen guys? Not by rule, at least. I can go back and check stacks, but on a 3-game slate, generally, I don't really care that much about things like that, just because the opportunity cost is going to be so low that, like, normally, if this is a full slate, the thinking would be like, if I have Niang and Mitchell and Garland, I would rather grab a different $3,800 guy than Max Strus or something. And basically, like, you're hoping Niang's the one that gets hot from 3. He gets the extra minutes. Strus doesn't. But on a slate like this, there's just so few alternatives that it's still relatively likely that even if Niang does well, that Strus is like still the next best cheap guy, or whoever. So generally don't care as much. Looking at stacks, so 4 of my 150 lineups would have 4 Cavs, 3 or 42 would have 3, 68 have 2. So I mean, you can see that there's kind of like a de facto limit at 3. There's a few that have 4 snuck in, but yeah, 3 kind of just seems like the answer for the most part. Power said I like Cleveland, but this is a 2 possession pace down against Philly. They still have a 120. They still have the highest team total, second highest team total on the slate. But yeah, I mean, it would be better if Philly played at a faster pace, but they still are in one of the most appealing spots, I think. Moving on to the Pels and Memphis. Nobody is questionable for the Pels. Yves Missi is back. I assume he will be moving into the starting lineup. Zion is out. Herb Jones is out. Brandon Ingram is out. DeJounte Murray available. Antonio Reeves is out. Keon Brooks is out, who doesn't matter. I just realized I gave him like a minute of garbage time that I guess I need to take away. But Missi back is the big thing here. Should move Daniel Tice back to the bench. And not surprisingly, I am getting around 2x the field on Missi. He's 5,100. He is a relatively logical pivot to Donovan Klingen's ownership. He has $1,100 more, but that generally isn't going to be that difficult to find. It's like a 2v2 in a lot of spots. So only getting 15% ownership. I do think he's interesting. He generally plays more when Zion is out. Now, I did knock his minutes projection slightly from where I would normally be, just because he did miss a couple games with the illness, and Daniel Tice has been playing relatively well, so I don't know if he gets rewarded with some extra minutes. But we have seen Missi play considerably more when Zion's out. Like, if you just go back and look at his game logs, you can actually kind of, without even knowing Zion's status, pretty accurately just be like, Zion was in, Zion was out, based on whether Missi played like 31 minutes or 26 minutes. So I do think that he might be getting slept on a little bit here, just because, he missed time, and then his recent game logs are kind of shitty as far as minutes go because Zion was mostly in. So I do think that he is going a little bit overlooked here. Obviously, it's a scary spot. They're double-digit dogs at Memphis, but not a bad point per minute guy. Good salary, not a ton of ownership coming into him. Think he looks interesting. Javonte Green, 3,600. I mean, I would love for that to drop. If it doesn't, it doesn't. This is just purely a 3-game slate type play. I'm assuming Javonte Green starts. He's averaging around 26 minutes or so. May or may not close. If he's playing well, he probably will. If he's not, he probably won't. We didn't see Brandon Boston in the rotation last game, so that is potentially a benefit for Green's playing time in general. But really, it's just that he's $3,600 and he's opening up other stuff. We saw that I'm getting basically around the field on LaMelo. I'm 2x the field on Maxey. I am over the field on Mark Williams at 7,800. I am over the field on Mitchell. I'm over on Garland. Tough to do all that if you're not playing shit like Javonte Green is basically what it comes down to. DeJounte Murray, 8,400, 35% owned. I have 25%. Not a lot to say there. Should play on average 32, 33 minutes. If this game is truly competitive, he certainly could play more. We saw the overtime game against, I believe it was Utah last game, where Murray got like 45 minutes, including overtime. But we also saw the game a couple games ago where it was misleading in the other direction because Jose Alvarado made like 5 or 6 threes in the fourth quarter, and DeJounte Murray never came back. The truth is, typically it's going to be somewhere in the middle. Your normal game is just going to be DeJounte Murray playing around 32, 33 minutes. So he looks good. There are just plenty of alternatives in that price range. And, I think for the most part, you can kind of see that that's the price range, like I was saying with Bridges, where I'm targeting pivots the most, I think, just because I understand DeJounte Murray's a good play. I agree he's a good play, but he's not that different than Darius Garland. He's not that different than Donovan Mitchell. He's not that different than, any number of other guys. So still getting to him, but just not quite as much as the field. Right around the field on McCollum at 7,600 as well. Trey Murphy should play a bunch of minutes, but his salary is up to 8,200, which puts him right back in that price range with DeJounte Murray. I'm getting a little bit of Jeremiah Robinson Earl at 3,600. This is, again, just a 3-game slate. Hope shit breaks your way and you get lucky type of thing. My assumption is that Robinson Earl is ahead of Brandon Boston in the rotation now. And he also is likely to get garbage time, at least some of it, if we get garbage time. So obviously his minutes are very fluid, volatile, but that's not the worst thing at low ownership on a 3-game slate. Jordan Hawkins, 3,400, has been playing more. There was a stretch for a while where the Pelicans were pretty clearly not trying to play him and CJ McCollum together. They seem to have gotten past that. He's playing minutes alongside him now, which is huge really for both of them, because the problem that you were running into is that if Jordan Hawkins came off the bench and played well, CJ McCollum was playing less minutes than usual. And more often than not, Jordan Hawkins was just getting these like 13-minute games because CJ McCollum was taking all the minutes. So getting them back to what they were doing last year, where Jordan Hawkins is sharing the floor with McCollum, is big for Hawkins' playing time. I have him at 20.5 minutes here. He is getting some ownership. So is Alvarado. I'm just not getting to as much as the field. Again, I think this kind of goes back to Cleveland. If my projections on the Cleveland guys change any, or come down, like I would probably start getting more here. But since I'm a little bit higher on the Cleveland guys than the field, that's making me get to them. And I guess what would be more likely is like if LeVert gets ruled out, my projections on the Cleveland Wings isn't really going to change much, because I'm like, it'll change a little bit. They'll go up, but I'm mostly going to be giving minutes to Tristan Thompson, whereas the industry's projections will mostly be giving minutes at that point to the Wings that I'm already playing. So then their ownership will come up, and then there's less of a benefit to me playing them. And it makes more sense for me to mix in more Jordan Hawkins, Jose Alvarado, etc. Certainly high upside guys, though. Hawkins can, light it up off the bench. He's certainly capable of getting hot. He won me like 125K in a tournament last year, so I'll always like him. Alvarado, racks up defensive stats. We saw 2 games ago, like I was saying, that he got hot enough to just keep DeJounte Murray off the floor. So they are both relatively high upside value options. And then finally wrapping things up with Memphis, which has the potential to completely change the slate. Ja Morant is questionable with an illness. He did not go through shoot around. I'm still projecting him in for now because guys missing shoot around with illness just really isn't that alarming to me. He also has already done that once this year and ended up playing. But the other thing is, like, if you have a sprained ankle and you miss shoot around, it's usually a pretty good sign that you're not going to play because you're physically injured. If you have any type of illness and you're Ja Morant, who is, a star, like, you don't need practice. There's just no real benefit to the team having him at shoot around, no matter if it's just like a cough or he's deathly ill, like anywhere in between. There's just no benefit. The risks outweighs the reward of Ja Morant being there around his teammates more than he needs to be. So I don't read into it when it's guys missing for an illness. So I still have him in for now. This is another spot where I'm 2x the field on one of the best players on the slate, which is pretty cool. 9K. 11% owned. I'm getting to 20%. Right around the field on Jaren Jackson as well, 8,100. So I like both of those guys a lot. This team does have the highest total on the board. There is blowout risk, obviously, but again, that's just, I think it's kind of like a situation where, going back to my point earlier, where spread obviously correlates with likelihood of blowout, but probably not as strongly as people think. It kind of seems like there's just like an assumption that the Portland Charlotte game is super likely to stay competitive, and then we need to just like shave all these minutes off of John Morant and Jaren Jackson and Donovan Mitchell, etc. And I did shave more minutes off of them than I did the Charlotte guys, but still makes me get to them a lot. So they look good. Scottie Pippen at 3,700 is, I guess, just sort of replacing Jose Alvarado for me. This is a perfect example of a 3-game slate type thing, because I would rather have Alvarado. But what would happen on a larger slate is Alvarado would be like 5% owned. And so I would just say, okay, Alvarado is my, could get hot off the bench, or Hawkins, whoever is my, could get hot off the bench, cheap guy, hope to get lucky guy. He's 5%. That works. On this slate, he's going to be 10. They're going to be 10 to 15% owned. So then you kind of like take a step further and say, okay, well, in these lineups, I already have all these guys that are relatively popular. I need to find a cheap guy, but I don't really want to take on another 10 to 15% guy. And you say, okay, like on average, Jose Alvarado is playing 17 to 18 minutes. On average, Scottie Pippen's playing like 17-ish minutes. Also, would likely get garbage time. So even though Alvarado projects maybe a little bit better, he's 3 times the ownership, and I can just hope to get lucky with Scottie Pippen instead. So that's why he's showing up. Whereas like on a larger slate, the difference between like, a 1% owned Scottie Pippen and a 4% owned Alvarado, I would just still play Alvarado because his raw ownership is still so low. Zach Edey, 4K, just waiting for the game where he plays real minutes again. It seemed like we were going to finally get it last game against Charlotte. I was a little bit over the field. Still ended up coming in at like 18 and a half, 19 minutes. I have him at 19 minutes here. At 4K, this is like a direct pivot, I guess, to Klingon, where another, I guess, kind of similar example to what I was just saying about Pippen versus Alvarado. Donovan Klingon is clearly the preferred option to Edey. As we talked about, I have him projected for 22 minutes. As you can see, I have 19 going to Edey. The range of outcomes for what we assume is a limited Donovan Klingon is not that different than Zach Edey. It's not 4 times better than Zach Edey. So I have a little bit more Klingon than Edey, but I am fine just getting a little bit over the field here on Edey as well. Desmond Bane, if you can get to him, great. Santi Aldama is also questionable at 4,800. He has volatile playing time as well. No Jake LaRavia, which could open up more minutes for him too. Jalen Wells, 4,400, shooting guard, small forward, starting, typically playing around 27 minutes. I'm about half the field there, but I think he's a perfectly fine value guy. I wish Brandon Clark had power forward ownership, or eligibility rather, but he's getting 9% ownership, which at 3,500 I think is fine. I do think, based on what we saw last game, that you're probably going to get close to 48 minutes combined from the 3-man group of Edey, Clark, and Huff. I expect it to be Edey and Clark playing very, very similar minutes, and then Huff just kind of playing the rest. But they played 47.2 minutes last game. No LaRavia does mean that you need Jaren Jackson playing the 4 more. So I do expect that you'll get close to 48 from those guys. And then it's just really volatile, exactly how it gets broken down. We did see Jay Huff didn't play the first half last game, subs in the second half, scores 13 real points in like a 5-minute stretch, and still didn't find his way into additional minutes. So that kind of sucks from the angle if you were trying to make like a Jay Huff comes in, gets hot, and gets more minutes argument. Not to say that it wouldn't happen this time, but you saw him play as well as you humanly can, and they still were like, okay, get your ass back on the bench until garbage time last game. But I think you're basically getting 48 from those 3. So it does make Clark look like a pretty good value as well. Luke Kennard at 4,500, priced pretty much correctly. And then GG Jackson, the minutes aren't ramping up yet. It'll probably be a little bit before they do. If this weren't a 3-game slate, there would be zero interest at all here. But this is a point per minute guy that produces at a high rate. He is 3K flat with no ownership. If he lands in a lineup here or there, fine. R. Stanley said, what team are you playing the most of? I assume Cleveland. Yeah, it's got to be Cleveland. Yeah, it's Cleveland. Cleveland, Memphis, Pels. top three. Everybody pretty close. Portland coming in at the bottom, but Cleveland running away with it for all the reasons that I said. But yeah, don't forget that Aldama questionable and Morant's questionable. So hopefully we get that news before lock, but be ready to late swap for that if they get ruled out. Other than that, that's all I have for this one. 3-gamer, pretty interesting slate though. Should be pretty fun to play. Hopefully you guys do well. If you have any last minute questions, throw them in chat now. But otherwise, good luck on your lineups. Have a good weekend. Thank you for checking out the show. Don't forget the thumbs up button, all of that. My projections, as always, are in the link in the description below. You can get them standalone by themselves with a 3-day trial, or if you sign up for Endgame Syndicate, they are posted in Discord there. No additional charge. So either one of those gets you access to my projections that update as I update them live. So check those out. But otherwise, thanks for checking out the show. Good luck on your lineups tonight. See you back here next week.